Hello and welcome back to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we're concentrating on the theme of honour and in particular how this theme manifests itself across the tragic play Macbeth by William Shakespeare. To a Jacobean audience and to us today, honour is the quality of knowing and doing what is seen as morally right. Now, bespoke to a Jacobean audience, this would have been perceived much more through a lens of looking up to God, and in particular viewing that God is looking down on your actions if you do disobey what is right. Therefore, the king, the person who has authority in God's name, should not be treated badly. This examination absolutely annihilates exactly why Macbeth moves from honour to dishonour. So let's dig in. Our first glimpse of Macbeth as a man whose reputation is full of honour is in the description the captain gives in Act 1, Scene 2. He says, "For brave Macbeth, well he deserves that name." And referring to the previous Thane of Cawdor, who Macbeth had to kill because he was a traitor, what he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won. Fascinatingly here, the adjective brave alongside Macbeth, alongside the other really hugely illustrious noble Macbeth, these adjectives really reflect how an audience would feel about Macbeth, alongside the verb, well, he deserves that name. Equally, it's stunning to see that within the same act we will see this noble man turn against his own king. So much of this here is that we are seeing how Macbeth can act in an honourable manner to save his kingdom, but equally how we and Duncan can be blindsided quite quickly by the idea that he is loyal when in fact he's self-interested. Duncan says in Act 1, Scene 4, "Honour like stars shines on all its deservers." He's not just talking about his own role as king, he's talking about that of his son Malcolm one day. He is talking about the role of being a king, and crucially how, like stars, honour is a gift bestowed upon its people in a kingdom. You should be shining down on your people. Certainly the chief purpose of this scene is to bring Macbeth and Duncan together. And by showing this kind of touching gratitude of an old monarch who, dare I say it, is a bit foolish, he's been fooled before, towards his chief warrior, gives us a double sense of the wickedness of the crime which Macbeth has already premeditated against his sovereign and is plotting. For an audience, we can see that Duncan is a valid voice. Yet, we certainly have concerns about the choices of Macbeth if he is going to act in a dishonourable fashion against someone chosen by God. Donalbain's words in Act 2, Scene 3 speak vividly of the dishonour that he can sense his father has experienced. When he says, "I'll to Ireland shall keep us both the safer," he's referring to him and his brother Malcolm. There's daggers in men's smiles. What he's talking about here is this idea that people will smile to your face, but those very smiles could kill you. That metaphorical language of daggers in men's smiles, it's grueling, violent imagery. Duncan, their father, as we already know, was not a good judge of character. He even admitted that in the face of the former Thane of Cawdor, that there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. In contrast to their innocent father, these boys, these men, Malcolm and Donalbain, they understand that things in the court are not as they should be. And for an audience, we understand that these men are honourable. They recognise it's safer to flee. A Jacobean audience might be struck by how this is a dangerous move for the kingdom, and they may actually question whether these men are honourable. Yet we should judge them by what happens later in the play on that front. We are introduced to Macduff after the murder of Duncan, and we see his forthright, incredible concerns about Macbeth really starkly in Act 2, Scene 4. As he leaves, he says, "Adieu, lest our old robes sit easier than our new." By this, what he's really alluding to is that Macbeth has assumed a role to which he has no legitimate claim. He's wearing borrowed robes. as are those who stay in his court when they know he may be culpable. Macduff refuses to attend Macbeth's coronation, he will not visit him, and actually he won't even do so when directly asked to. He knows that Macbeth is acting in a dishonourable fashion, and he also knows that the Kingdom of Scotland is not for him to rule over. In fact, he's the only courageous character in the play who's principled enough to stand up to Macbeth and continue to openly defy him. In many ways, he is the embodiment of honour, in contrast to Macbeth, who increasingly shows his dishonourable qualities from Act 2 onwards, in action as well as thought. Crucially here, even in Act 4, Scene 3, we see no change in the virtue of Macduff, as he says that Macbeth is an untitled tyrant, bloody sceptred. This is a continuation of the same idea that his reign is abominable and he must be stopped. This is a fascinating moment in Act 3, Scene 1. Banquo's honour is questionable here. It's fascinating because we see him as a loyal friend, but honour in this case is doing what's morally right in the eyes of God and the monarch. He doesn't immediately tell Duncan straight away about the witch's prophecies way back in Act 1. And instead he says, "Thou hast it now, your king, Cawdor, Glamis, all, as the weird women promised, and I fear thou playest most foully for it." Banquo is afraid, and he certainly suspects Macbeth captured the crown unfairly, and that Macbeth cheated. But this language is fascinating. It's this dishonest play that I find interesting. He's questioning, and he's right to question and suspect Macbeth's foul play. But as the audience, we're the only ones who know for a fact that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth murdered Duncan. The tension and the suspicion continues to build. This superlative "most foully" is what creates the fear, and that alliteration between fear and foully acknowledges exactly why Macbeth must kill him. And in fact, the plot to kill him, Banquo, is literally in motion the minute he questions Macbeth's honour. But I dare you to question Banquo's back for not challenging it straight away. So a matter of moments later, we see Macbeth actually plot and ensure that Banquo will be murdered in Act 3, Scene 1. He demands that the moment for it must be done tonight. And something from the palace always thought that I require a clearness. Now, he goes on to talk about how it's not just Banquo who needs to die, but his son Fleance. And of course, this does not work. The audience at this point is very well aware of the dishonourable nature of Macbeth. But more than that, we're really struck by how cold and callous that transition is. It's the urgency of it must be done tonight. He wants to be separate from it. Clearness here means being well away from being seen to be wrong, when of course he's just exposed for us that he is. This is really just a quick, short amount of time before we've seen his soliloquy, where he's confided and said, "To be thus is nothing but to be safely thus." And that's him talking about his role as a monarch, saying you can't be king until you know you're safe as a king. And this is his paranoia taking over. Anyone who questions him must be eliminated. And of course, this only proves his dishonourable qualities. It does nothing to show any honour at this point. By Act 4, we really engage with the mass slaughter of Macduff's family. And it is a slaughter. Seize upon fife, give to the edge of the sword his wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line. It really reminds me that Macbeth by this point is acting like King Herod in the Bible. He's massacring innocent people who are just related to the clan of Macduff. This idea that anyone within a trace of his line, his genealogy, it's tragic. More than anything, it's another mark of dishonour. And when it extends to wife and babies, we can't help but think this is just callous, it's out of control. And we need to see that, in fact, for us to really understand why Macduff is all the more honourable. Macduff in Act 5, Scene 4 stresses how important it is for the army to fight Macbeth, and especially because others are scared to stay. When he says, "Let our censures attend the true event, and put we on industrious soldiership," what a censure means is an opinion. Attend means to wait for something, and an event is an outcome, the outcome being the demise of Macbeth. Macduff is making the point here that they will know how strong Macbeth is after they've fought the battle. They've got to be brave. Until that time, they have to be really good soldiers. The steward agrees, and so do the audience. And thus this scene ends with like a contrast between Macbeth's desperate overconfidence actually, and his enemy's really calm, really gracious determination, knowing that God is on their side. And of course, knowing that what's morally right at this point is to bring down the Butcher King himself. Macduff shares his honourable qualities all the more after the slaughter of his family. And actually in Act 5, Scene 8, when he says, "I have no words, my voice is in my sword," what we're really struck by is the role reversal here. The foil character, that's Macduff, he's restoring honour again in violence. He's showing up Macbeth. In many ways, it's an echo to Act 1, Scene 2, where we earlier saw Macbeth do something similar on the behalf of Duncan. We see the glory of Macduff standing up for what is right, and we see it as honourable. And so in some ways, there's a synergy between his masculinity and his honour linked of doing what's right for Scotland to restore order. Shakespeare is keen to restore the disorder, and Malcolm restoring honour in Scotland is what we see in the final moments of Act 5, Scene 8. His reference to the dead butcher and his fiend-like queen. I'm going to encourage you to hear the sounds as we go through this. "Who, as 'tis thought, by self and violent hands, took off her life, this and what needful else that calls upon us, by the grace of grace, we will perform in measure, time, and place." This is really showing Malcolm as a morally sound man, the grace of grace. This is capital G for the second use of the word grace, because it's the grace of God he's calling upon. He's talking about measure, time, and place. He's really expounding on his Christian virtue here. Beyond that, we are also acknowledging the way in which he's speaking. He is using iambic pentameter. This is 10 beats per line, and it mirrors the heartbeat. Shakespeare intentionally uses this to place stress on the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, and 10th syllable. But this device is most common in Shakespeare's work to stress and depict noble characters. Malcolm is one who we're meant to see in an honourable light. And crucially, this important moment of his speech points to the resolution of this play. We need to see Macbeth as dishonourable, a dead butcher, as he says, and his fiend-like queen. These are devilish language choices in contrast to the virtuous language choices of grace, and the measurement of so much order rather than disorder of how these will be performed in measure, time, and place. All in all, Shakespeare is incredibly skillful at showing us honour and also exposing dishonour as a stark warning to his audience and a reminder of how thrilling it is to watch.